The fact is, boy, my daughter could do a whole lot better than you.
No bones about that, George.
Mr. LeBlanc, if you please, Charlie. And if you really loved her, you won't show up tomorrow.
And how's that?
Because it would only be a matter of time before she woke up from her little Shakespearean delusion. Molly's accustomed to a certain lifestyle. I've made sure of that. You think she really understands what she's getting herself into? The girl's only 21 years old.
I suppose it's not my place to tell her how to feel. She wants to marry me, then married we'll be. And by this time tomorrow we'll be father and son, having a splendid time at the reception in this here bar. Think you could live with that?
For richer or poorer, you mean?
For as long as we both shall live, Mr. LeBlanc.
I suppose time will tell, son.
It was hot that Friday night. The moon was bright and full. All the doors and windows were open at the Royal Hotel Bar in New Orleans. The sound of clanking glasses, with their dingy hard water spots, lightly tapped on the eardrums of its thirsty patrons. They didn't seem to mind the heat and crowdedness of the pub, as long as the whiskey and gin kept flowing. But as for 22-year-old Charlie McCormick, he was nursing a tall glass of soda pop at the bar counter. He's never had a hard drink in his life. After watching his father drink away all of his family's money, he didn't plan on inheriting that legacy. The musky smoke of a lit cigar wafted over him, followed by a voluminous plume blown forcefully right into his face by George LeBlanc, one of the richest men in the South, sitting right next to him at the bar. The two of them are not friends, but in just a day's time, they were to become family, bonded for life.
I realize this isn't the best time to be having a wedding. I know you've been working towards being elected senator this fall, and given your recent diagnosis...
Oh, Charles, it has nothing to do with all that. You know this is all about Molly, my only daughter, my only child now that Philip is gone. This is about you coming in, trying to grab up some kind of dowry, and it doesn't just boil my blood, boy. It takes me to the brink. You see, you get it now?
I'm not looking for money. You have to believe me when I tell you this. I've never loved anything more than I've loved your daughter, and with all due respect, nothing will stop me from marrying her tomorrow.
Whatever you say, my boy.
Young Charlie dismounted his bar stool defeated.
Well, I've got an early start in the morning. I bid you a good night's sleep. It's no good for your heart to stay up so late at night.
Charlie made his way for the door as George said under his breath.
Welcome to the family, you broke buffoon.
George sat at the bar and pressed the bartender for more drinks, although he was already 20 sheets to the wind. He kept checking the inside pocket of his smoking jacket, always satisfied with its contents. He looked troubled, glancing out into the street, hoping to see a comet crash down and reduce the city to ash. Anything that might stop the wedding of his precious daughter Molly to the near-destitute Charles McCormick. It was bad enough George had to foot every expense for the celebration. Now, he had to face the fact that they would be enjoying a lovely East Coast honeymoon on his dime. But no annihilating space rock decimated the French Quarter, to his anguish. He did, however, hear a scuffle just outside the bar near the alleyway. Nosy and drunk, he poked his head out of an open window to see if he could see what all the noise was about. His eyes were squinted, as his eyesight wasn't what it used to be. His failing heart sank when he saw who was raising Cain in the street. It was Charlie and another man arguing, raising their voices and eventually their fists at each other. George had a very inebriated choice to make, one that would change the course of his life. Many lives, in fact. He returned to the bartender and tossed a wad of bills on the counter, thanking him warmly.
Thanks. See you tomorrow, Tommy.
George slipped his arm under his jacket and made his way down the street to put a stop to whatever public spectacle his future son-in-law was about to make.
What seems to be the problem here?
George croaks as he approaches the men, all the while slurring his words.
Nothing to concern you with, sir,
the stocky stranger says back.
Well, you're shouting for the whole parish to hear.
George scolds.
So now it concerns me.
It's okay, Mr. LeBlanc. We're just having a misunderstanding is all.
Charlie claims.
Well, it seems this Irishman doesn't understand proper English. I told him to hand over his money, but he don't seem to understand me. But he understands you just fine.
The man pulls out a shiny scalpel, no doubt lifted from a local clinic while he was stealing other items of value.
We don't want any trouble,
Charlie assures, placing himself between George and the mugger.
I just don't have any money is all. Honest, please don't do this. It's not worth it.
George bounces his eyes between the two men. He grips his metal companion resting in his pocket and slides it out slowly and quietly. He rests it at his side, hiding behind Charlie.
That's about enough of this. You go on home, or wherever it is you sleep at night.
George warns, lifting his eyebrows so the man could see the whites of his bloodshot eyes. He licks his drying lips and slowly lines up a shot from his hip. George just needed him to make the first move. Then this would all be over. He entertained himself with the thought. Charlie suddenly lunges for the man's scalpel, who in turn swipes at him, cutting through Charlie's shirt and quite a bit of his skin. And then the gun goes off. The stranger tosses Charlie off and away from him. His body scatters a group of helpless garbage cans, their lids rattling noisily through the alley. George stood there, stratified. What had he just done? After looking upon Charlie's lifeless body for longer than he should have, he peered up at the stranger, who was equally stunned. A drunken sweat starting to bead upon George's bald head.
Help me, or we're both going down for this.
He says quietly and coldly.
No way, pal. I'm out of here.
But George pulled back the hammer and the man stopped right where he was, raising his hands.
We'll make it quick.
He stepped carefully towards Charlie, flicking the revolver towards the graveyard down the street.
I'll get his head.
After a while of lugging Charlie through the French Quarter within the shadows, George decided they were well out of earshot from any other living soul. He spouted at his accomplice.
You know it was supposed to be you.
Yeah, right, pal.
Well, it's dark out here.
Whatever you say, mister.
They both panted and wheezed in between whispered verbal jabs, but they finally reached the graveyard. Now to pick the perfect plot to stash Charlie in. Luckily, there was a shovel left nearby from a recent burial, and the graveyard attendant was nowhere in sight. They find an open space close enough to the other graves that would do just fine. George aggressively instructs the man how far down and how wide to dig.
Seems like you've done this before.
Just keep quiet and dig.
George keeps his hands on his pistol, watching the man shovel deeper and deeper into the consecrated earth. Eventually, George is satisfied with the depth and helps the man toss Charlie face down into the grave. The criminal slaps away loose dirt from his palms and knees and asks George if they should pay some sort of respects.
Good riddance.
George says coldly as he rubs his hand into his chest, pain streaking his face. The man shrugs uncomfortably and grabs the shovel, knowing George and his noisy little companion are good for it if he deserts their dark operation now. But between the shoveling, they could swear they heard rustling behind them. The man sped up the process of pushing fresh dirt onto Charlie until he's no longer detectable under the mound. Another snap of a twig in the distance was enough for the mugger. Someone must be out there lurking amongst the headstones, he thought. He'd rather take his chances running away and risk the formidable but drunken shot of George LeBlanc than be caught grave digging in the cemetery by the authorities. He tossed the shovel into the hole and sprinted away. As the man disappeared into the night, George checked his pocket watch in the meager light of the distant street lamps. It was midnight. He still had time to get back to his hotel room and get some decent sleep, as poor late Charlie prescribed. He had a long and troublesome day ahead of him. And as far as George was concerned, it would be worse than today. He stumbled his way back to the Royal Hotel, and the crickets in the graveyard began their nightly chirps, flooding the area with delicate Mobius sound. A clap of thunder woke George the next morning. His head was throbbing, maybe too much scotch. His wife Lily had already left to get ready. He hoped everyone wouldn't make such a fuss over him being so late. Rain on Molly's wedding day. She'll find this quite romantic, he thought. He could already hear her say,
"It means good luck, Daddy."
But George would soon have the great pleasure of consoling his poor daughter when she finds out her good-for-nothing husband-to-be has abandoned her at the altar, never to be seen again. It would be everything George had hoped for. Mud was absolutely everywhere. The outdoor ceremony may not have been the best idea in hindsight, but Molly insisted on the optics of having it outside amongst the magnolia trees. All the elite families in New Orleans were in attendance and completely soiled up to the knee in dirt, but it didn't seem to bother most of them. The sun was now brightly shining, and they liked the intimate nature of the nuptials. The crowd was buzzing as they took their seats in the hotel courtyard. White gloves gripped the backs of chairs, hopeful to be the first to spot the beautiful bride come around the corner and make her way to the altar. The groomsmen stewed in the midday sun, ruminating about the cooling shade of the hotel lobby. And at the center of the floral arch stood an old, crooked-bodied officiant. The band struck up a reverent but peppy song, and participants lifted quietly up out of their seats, struggling to maintain their balance in the sticky mud. The door opened, and out came Mr. George LeBlanc. His normally bald head was covered in a fine black top hat to match his jacket. He helped his daughter over the threshold and onto the muddy lawn. Molly was stunning in her immaculately embroidered lace-trimmed wedding dress and veiled tiara. She was a natural beauty and took after her mother Lily, a true American princess. Her smile beamed, though she was nervous and tried to hide it behind her bouquet. Guilt started to creep up toward George's heart through his stomach. Was her broken heart worth his vindication? They took their place at the start of the aisle. She linked arms with her father at his elbow, and together they looked down the aisle. The wedding party was assembled and awaiting her arrival. Her face suddenly burst with euphoria. This was the moment she had been dreaming about for months. George's face, however, resembled that of a man turned to stone, petrified by the Gorgon Medusa. His eyes grew wide, and he could barely keep his balance. Standing in front of the ancient officiant was Charlie McCormick, the groom. He stood tall, handsome as ever, and with the pure heart Molly fell in love with in Charleston just 6 months ago. His smile outshined the sun, and it lit up Molly's world. Though Charlie's pants were soaked nearly up to his waist, he didn't seem to mind, and he didn't appear nervous. He looked perfect. The only blemish being a large nick across his nose. It was as if it were recently broken. But he stood there smiling that bright, unfazed smile, his light-colored eyes fixed on his enchanting bride. The only puncture in this picture-perfect moment was the fact that Charlie McCormick was supposed to be dead. Molly smiled and giggled girlishly as her eyes met Charlie's. George swayed backwards slightly, as if to faint at the sight of him. He was confused, frightened, and angry. What is he doing here? How could he be here? He expected a groomless ceremony, one that would end in bitter tears of despair after waiting all afternoon for him to show. His disappointment was unfathomable. This couldn't be Charlie. It had to be an imposter. George was pulled down the aisle towards the arch by his precious swooning daughter. She breathed a sigh of relief. George could hear her sniffing and choking back tears. The audience smiled brightly toward them and nodded approvingly towards the two, bidding them well with their eyes. Although George felt like he was out of his body, he still felt every emotion he ought to. How is this possible? He killed him last night. He buried the man himself.
And who gives this woman away to be married today?
The feeble officiant says, licking his fingertips and flicking through his big leather-bound book. Molly jabs her father in the ribs as far too much time has gone by since the question was posed.
That's you, Daddy.
George blinks and returns close enough to Earth to respond.
Yes, me.
The officiant smiles and gestures for him to take his seat next to his wife in the front row. As he does, he keeps his eyes on the man standing before his daughter, claiming the best years of her life and stripping George's last name from her for all of time. Despite his best efforts, he couldn't change anyone's fate, much less his own. The ceremony seemed to speed along faster than George had the capacity to cope with. The exchanging of rings began.
Do you, Charles, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live?
Yes.
Charles said almost sternly, looking into Molly's wet, sparkling eyes. She laughs and smiles, pleased to finally hear the words outside of her fantasies.
And do you, Molly, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health until death do you part?
The old man asked her.
Yes.
She said, tightly gripping Charlie's hands. He held back tears, but his smile didn't waver. He charmed the crowd with his vulnerability. George wasn't nearly impressed. He twisted in his seat, tension gathering in the nape of his neck, threatening to spread into his shoulders. He was still lightheaded, but his nervous system wouldn't allow him to black out. He had to protect his family from this, whatever this thing was. But to make a scene would make a potential disaster into a full-blown catastrophe.
then by the power vested in me by the state of Louisiana on this day of July 6, 1934, I now pronounce these two our man and wife. I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Charles and Molly McCormick.
The crowd erupted in applause as they kissed. Thankful they all made it through the ceremony without toppling over from the heat. They were now excited for brief refreshments in the hotel lobby, followed by a lively reception at the hotel bar. George kept his distance from his new son-in-law. He barely said a word to him, even as they took a few photographs in the courtyard. He couldn't keep his eyes off of him. He looked him over, searching for some sort of button or zipper that he could pull down and reveal who he really was underneath. Did Charles even recognize him? Did he really not remember what happened to him the night before? Charles finally made full eye contact with George as the majority of the guests left the courtyard. A flash of yellow that glinted deeply behind his eyes startled him. It was as if someone else was looking through them too. George lost his breath for a moment. That silent smile that sold a perfect story to the rest of the guests unsettled George. As he looked closer, he could see the bursting seams of his facade. The nick on his nose must have happened when he was dumped into the ground. He was caked in mud from the waist down, and he didn't seem to be sweating an ounce. What's more, Charlie's shallow breathing seemed laborious and unnatural. It was as if something else was taking refuge inside of him, waiting for its opportunity to escape. Charlie made long, unreasonable strides across the lawn directly toward his new father-in-law, further unnerving George with every step he took.
Mr. LeBlanc.
Charlie rigidly protracted his hand for George to shake. Dark brown dirt was well settled underneath his fingernails. George looked around and noticed they had onlookers of this momentous interaction. George stammered.
Call me, Dad, of course, son.
Though he was entirely insincere, no one could ever tell either way. He gripped Charlie's waxy hand tightly, who reciprocated.
Thank you, Dad. That means a lot to me. I only wish your son Philip could have been here. I think we would have been great friends.
George was on the verge of implosion. How dare he utter his son's name, let alone stand alive and well in front of him, wearing the tuxedo he had to rent for him. George could have ripped Charlie's arm clean from his body in that moment. The absolute audacity. But he somehow kept his cool, despite the heat, and followed through with the handshake. They readjusted their hats and jackets, taking in the fresh air.
Shall we head inside and get something to drink?
George suggests.
Sure, George.
Charlie giggled a little under his breath, which slightly elevated George's blood pressure for some reason. Charlie truly somehow survived. He's here in the flesh. Perhaps he hit his head during the ordeal, woke up, and dug himself out of the grave. Maybe the bullet only grazed him. Perhaps he didn't remember a thing. It was the only explanation. But he couldn't decide which was a worse fate to forever endure. A penniless son-in-law, or his blood on his hands. They slipped into the lobby, where the glowing bride was swarmed with heavily perfumed matrons and bridesmaids, wiping tears and sweat from her blushing face. The sound of laughter filled the room, and this absolutely infuriated George. It's as if all of his closest friends and family were mocking him in his torment. Don't they know how much he's lost today? Where's the sympathy for him, the father of the bride? Where are the condolences? Even his wife Lily avoided eye contact with him for most of the cocktail hour. George, who was always the center of attention and the most gracious of hosts, has fallen into obscurity. As the bridal party and guests munched on the hors d'oeuvres supplied by the coffers of the LeBlanc legacy, the man who signed on the dotted line became one with the printed wallpaper. The waitstaff wriggled around him as if he was simply one of the wooden posts supporting the floor above them. The reception finally started in the hotel bar, and George's sister Marge took pleasure in introducing the happy new couple. Applause and cheers filled the closed-in, stuffy space. Champagne bottles popped, and drinks were poured. George was overstimulated, and his heart began to bother him. He watched Charlie from a distance the whole night as he drank glass after glass of champagne and socialized freely with his friends and family. Guests tapped the sides of the glasses with their utensils, invoking a kiss from the betrothed. What those around him mistook for George's mystique was really unbridled hatred for the groom. What had really happened? He couldn't get close enough to him to ask the one question he needed answered. How did he make it out of that grave? Molly drifted around the bar with Charlie at her side, greeting the various cliques of people. All the while, Charlie again and again removed his top hat and tipped it toward them. A massive clump of sticky scalp and hair came with it each time, hanging from the back of the brim. George seemed to be the only one who finally noticed and immediately swooped in to pull him aside. Politely, he excused himself and Charlie from the festivities and found a dark corner to speak in.
What the devil is going on, Charles?
He bites into Charlie with his words.
Whatever do you mean, George?
Charlie says, innocently concerned by George's tone.
Don't get wise with me, boy. Who are you, really?
His ragged, gravelly voice digs into the stifling air of the corner.
George, I don't know what you're talking about. Are you okay? Maybe you ought to lie down.
No. I killed you.
George spits.
What? What do you mean?
Charles says, much more concerned now. He looks over the crowd, searching for Lily to assist in this unfortunate breakdown. George snatches at Charlie's tie and pulls him in close.
You mean to tell me you don't remember when I shot you square in the back out in the street? What are you doing here? Who are you? Are you another one of Charlie's brothers after her dowry? I'll call the police.
George, I don't know what you're talking about. It's me. It's Charlie. Maybe we should grab some champagne. Level your head a bit. What do you say?
How? How are you alive, boy?
George seethes.
Why are you doing this to me? I'm not just coming apart. I can't be.
George, I'm just gonna grab you a drink. Just stay right here. Scotch, is it?
Charlie begins to lift his hat, and George brutally slams it back down on his head.
You just keep that hat on your head. You look better that way, trust me. I paid for the whole suit. You're going to wear it the whole night. Is that clear?
Charles feels scolded, but far be it from him to argue about finances at that moment.
You got it, George.
Charlie smiles and finds the beat of the clamoring band, letting his hips lead the way to his bride, already dancing in the center of the bar. George's blood pressure has hit a new high. He laps at the air around him in the quiet corner, loosening his beautiful tie and removing his own heavy hat. He feels light pressure on his forearm. He looks down to see a dark-skinned hand grabbing him gently.
He doesn't remember.
A sultry tone sneaks towards him from behind, and a beautiful black woman snakes around to face him. She's dressed in all white, from her shoes all the way up to the top of her perfectly cloth-wrapped head. Bracelets of gold rattled up and down her arms as she crossed them. She continued,
As me mercy to him, I made sure of dat. But I should thank you. You were the answer to me prayers.
And who are you, woman?
George said, trying not to be entranced by her.
That don't matter, boy. You must be beside yourself, looking upon a man you just buried. You should see your face.
George whipped his head around to see if anyone heard her words. They all seemed to be oblivious to the two of them altogether.
What are you talking about? Who buried somebody?
Oh, please, I saw the whole thing. What you did last night, with the man sitting at the bar.
The man sitting at the bar? George scrambles to get a view of the bar from the corner. Just as he feared, his accomplice from the night before was sitting on a stool, sipping an elegant flute of champagne he no doubt lifted off a nearby table.
How did you two even get in here? And just what do you think will happen if you tell anyone a word about this anyway?
The woman mocks his delusion of power over her.
Never mind that, Mr. LeBlanc. I'm not here for you. I needed to know my spell worked, and indeed it has. Now, listen. The groom will get to enjoy his wedding night with his lovely bride, and you will leave him be. He'll be dead soon enough. For good, that is. If you don't leave him be, you will force my hand, and your treachery will be known. You see, I have hypnotized Charles. He was quite distressed when he returned to his body, and boy, did he wail over his poor wife, Molly. He would have woke up the rest of the dead with his screams. So you see, I had no choice but to take his memory. He doesn't remember what you've done to him. The last thing he remembers was the nice talk you had in this bar last night.
You, charlatan. You expect me to believe you've got some kind of black magic voodoo powers. You're just some kind of low-life extortionist. I ought to have you jailed right here and now, all of you.
Please go right ahead, trifle with me, and you'll see.
She gestures for the door. The stranger from the midnight dig spins on his stool to face him, lifting the bottom of the flute towards the ceiling to pour the remaining contents into his open mouth. After a hard swallow, he connects his eyes with George's. He's not sure what he's doing there or what comes next, but he's been literally cornered.
What is it that you want, witch?
George requests clearly and directly.
Make your business quick here. You're interrupting a family function if you haven't noticed.
The woman smiles and tilts her head, taking her time to gather the patience to deal with George.
Well, I appreciate your warm hospitality. The boy, he will die at midnight and will soon enough be safe in the grave. Make sure he's out of sight from his beloved by then, for her sake at least. And Mr. LeBlanc, you must believe me, I had no idea today would be his wedding day. For that misfortune, I am sorry. But I saw an opportunity and I took it. I'm sure you can understand that. But Mr. LeBlanc, heed me when I say, tonight will be ungodly.
She smiles sweetly and looks over her shoulder at the newlyweds energetically spinning around with the guests.
Those poor souls will suffer greatly, but at least they get to enjoy their wedding day before it's all over. We owe her that.
Let's say I believe the thing over there really is Charles, and you pulled him up out of that grave last night. Why? What's in it for you? What's in it for him?
George motions towards the stranger at the bar, who was gleefully tapping his foot to the beat of the drums.
Bart and I have an agreement. Don't you worry about him. As for me, Charles is simply a vessel to me. That's all you need to know. What do you care anyway, Mr. LeBlanc?
A vessel? Vessel for what?
George says, becoming increasingly concerned that perhaps a dead man truly is twirling around his family members in the middle of a New Orleans bar.
That's all you need to know.
She pulls back from Mr. LeBlanc and smiles tenderly.
Like I said, I should thank you for the fine gift you've given me. A man with such a pure heart goes for quite a pretty penny in my line of work. He was a rare find, you understand, as much as I had to patch him up. He was sliced up pretty good, you'll remember. But just a warning, since your innocent daughter is now involved. Charles will change as the night wears on. The host tends to fade away the higher and brighter the moon gets in the sky. But there's no need to worry. The guest within will mind his manners and mind your daughter, as long as you keep out of the way. He's got his own business to tend to.
I should kill you where you stand, the both of you.
George said sincerely.
You never know, Mr. LeBlanc. In time, our paths may cross again. Maybe you'll get your chance. But for now, I'm leaving Bart here to look after Charlie until he's crossed over. I should leave before people start to whisper about us.
She smirked coyly and disappeared into the chaotic, dancing crowd. George lost track of her in the sea of bodies and never saw her again. He's left with far more questions than answers. But there's Bart, he thought to himself. Let's see what this criminal has to say. He makes his way through the wedding guests towards the bar. Another hand grips his arm amongst the crowd, and George attempts to tear away from it, believing it to be the witch back to hex him for good. But it was Charlie's best man and brother, Howard. He looked concerned and shouted over the loud, percussive music.
Mr. LeBlanc, excuse me, I need to talk to you.
George has no doubt what this is about. Looking back once more at Bart, he's satisfied that if the man can keep stealing food and keep himself busy, he won't be going anywhere soon. Howard and George retreat out into the quieter street, which is a lot cooler than inside the Royal Hotel bar. The late afternoon sun was sinking closer and closer to the horizon.
Mr. LeBlanc, first of all, thank you for everything. Everything's just so spiffy. Never seen so much extravagance in my life, really.
Well, you're quite welcome.
George barely paid attention to him and lit his cigar, sweeping his eyes up and down the street in hopes of seeing where the witch might have gone.
It's just... Charlie, he's acting a little different.
Howard said, concerned.
Oh, and how's that?
George said, still not looking at him. He's becoming more and more aware that he doesn't do well with the feeling of guilt. It's a relatively new emotion for him.
Well, for one thing, he's been eating heaps of fish.
Well, what's so wrong with that? I bought it for eating.
George said impatiently.
No, you see, Charlie's allergic to fish. Deathly allergic. I've had to slap shrimp out of his hand all day. And he's drinking. Charlie doesn't drink. Ever. Our father drank, you see. And he's using these profane words I've never even heard of before. Molly doesn't seem to be worried about it, but I don't know. I just wondered if you might have noticed anything different about him last night. He said the two of you spoke.
I wouldn't know, Mr. McCormick. Ask the man himself.
George snapped, reaching his limit.
Well, I suppose that settles it. Listen, Thanks again, Mr. LeBlanc. You really made my brother the happiest man in the world. And we'll do right by your daughter, I promise.
That should be all correct, Mr. McCormick.
George erupted, his back turned to him.
Yes, sir.
Howard searched for some kind of parting words, but came up empty-handed.
Good night, sir.
George paced the entryway of the bar, growing tired of the squawking trumpets and pounding drums. But over the music, he suddenly heard a ruckus coming from inside. Something was off. He returned to find Charles and Bart playing a dangerous knife game at the bar. The entire family was gathered around them, excited and grimacing at the thought of one of them losing a finger. Bart was successful in his run with the blade, despite already downing 3 glasses of champagne. It was now Charlie's turn. He was unfamiliar and unpracticed with this game, but he held the weapon steady in his hand, focusing his darting eyes on his fingers. He started out slow, stabbing in between the fingers of his hand on the bar countertop in an alternating fashion. He casually speeds up and maintains an alarming accuracy. The crowd gasps and hoots at the sight. But suddenly, just before performing the final winning maneuver, Charlie raises the knife high above his head. A deranged snarl shimmered across his face. With a happy grin, he strikes the bar hard with the knife tip right through his own hand. Molly screams in horror, and Charlie's face slowly returns to normal. He looks down at his hand, finding it disturbing that it didn't hurt. He lifts up his hand, the knife still lodged and poking through either side of it, though there wasn't a drop of blood. He presents it to the drunken guests for their opinion.
What do I do?
Everyone is silent. Charlie snorts and begins to cackle drunkenly, causing everyone else to nervously laugh along with him. He pulled the knife out of his hand and stuck it into the wood of the polished oak bar. Tommy the bartender shakes his head in resignation. He was promised a quiet reception with stuffy aristocrats, but now feels he has to prepare to wipe down the walls by the end of the night. Bart quickly yanks out the knife, wipes it clean, and puts it back in his boot. He looked quite disturbed by the whole thing despite his heavy intoxication. Charlie's eyes catch George's once more, and a chill slips down George's spine. He could see the uninvited guest within him, as the witch referred to it, surfacing ever so slowly. It may have been the scotch, but George was convinced Charlie's skull was fusing with that of a snake. He half expected a forked tongue to slip between his lips and flick toward him. What plans did it have with Charlie as its vessel? What was being unleashed tonight? What has George done? And could he do anything to stop it? The band decided it was time to slow down the party and play a slow song so the bride could dance with her father. She pulled him into the center of the room and placed one hand in his and the other on his shoulder. They embraced and began to sway.
So, how are you enjoying yourself, Daddy?
Molly asks sweetly, pink champagne and shrimp cocktail on her breath. George refuses to answer, driven mad by the idea of Molly being married to a monster. But every time he started to tell her, his shame and fear silenced him. There would be a good time, he thought, but now was not it. The sun began to set in the west, gently descending behind the buildings of the French Quarter.
Enjoying myself just fine, Dovey.
George finally replies, looking far off into nothing with malaise.
You look tired today, Daddy.
Molly said, growing more and more tired herself.
Oh, I was up late last night.
I heard.
George finally made eye contact with her.
And just what did you hear?
Charlie told me you and him were up until nearly midnight talking about the future, about my future, as Mrs. McCormick. He, said it was a good talk. Charlie seems so much more, confident today.
She fidgeted with the new shiny wedding ring on her finger, which was clutched in her father's hand.
Wedding aside, I think his time with you yesterday really changed him.
Maybe it did, Dovey.
They danced wordlessly until the last refrain rang out. George suddenly felt a poking tap on his shoulder. He knew it was Charlie. George had grown accustomed to his natural scent of dirt and decay by now.
May I?
Charlie said. George reluctantly stepped aside so that Molly was accessible for their first dance.
No, Daddy-o. You and I will have this dance.
The crowd laughed and cheered them on.
Oh, go on, Georgie.
Mrs. LeBlanc encouraged, finally paying him attention. He couldn't deny his guests the honor of watching a father-son dance, he supposes. Nothing made sense anymore, and there was nothing else under his control in the foreseeable future. George fully conceded. Time seemed irrelevant, and he was trapped in the throes of consequence.
I'll lead.
He and Charlie began their punchy waltz together, swinging each other around the bar with the other guests sloppily clapping to help them keep time.
So, Father,
Charlie says as the dance slows.
how are you enjoying the party? Has it hit you yet, everything that's happened?
Like a ton of bricks, I'd say, Charlie.
George says, slowly slipping into madness. A chuckle almost leaves his body.
And you?
Certainly. Molly looked like a dream today. What a vision.
Yes, lovely, lovely she was.
George began to get a bit dizzy from the spinning.
I can't wait for tonight, really.
Charlie slowly and eerily locked eyes with George, who locked eyes back. A smile curled up on Charlie's face.
From what I understand, you only have until midnight, my boy. Then it's back from whence you came.
Supposedly. But are you so sure you can trust the word of a voodoo priestess?
Charlie was unblinking and ramped up the speed of the waltz. George struggled to keep pace.
There is no uncertainty. You will not be spending the night with my daughter, whatever you are.
That is, unless I find a way out of this body. I found one before.
George nearly stumbles from the swinging motion of the waltz, and to his mercy, the band stops. He had survived a dance with a devil. George catches his breath and pulls Charlie in tightly for a hug, whispering into his ear so no one can hear.
Whatever you've come here for, demon, you best take it and go. Molly had no part in what I've done.
Charlie whispers back.
I care not of what part you've played.
His voice gargled and pitched down into a harsh growl.
You will learn tonight, Mr. LeBlanc, that the will of the gods is stronger than the will of man, and your impermanence suits your importunate folly. I will take what is due, and all is due.
Charlie softly kisses his cheek and releases him, revealing a bright red wet spot growing on the front of Charlie's dress shirt, slowly staining his gorgeous tie and cummerbund. Was it port wine? The guests wonder. Charlie looks down and is sobered by the sight. He looks around at the crowd, who have gone silent. The hurried stitching on his stomach must have finally busted apart during their rambunctious waltz.
George, I'm so sorry. I don't know what just happened. I'll pay for the cleaning fees. Just let me go clean this up.
Embarrassed, Charlie leaves the party with his younger brother Howard in tow. Molly, in hysterics, tries to chase after them, but George stops her. He has to somehow keep her safe from the truth that her husband was no longer who she thought he was, and neither was her father. He pulls her outside of the hotel to chat with her despite her protest. Where does he even begin?
Dovey, are you really, truly happy with him?
He asks softly, scanning the bar through the window for Charlie's reappearance.
Of course I am, Daddy. Can't you know that by now?
The poor young woman was nearly in tears as she wiped the agitating sweat from her hairline.
Daddy, can't you ever be happy for me? I know I'm not Philip, and I could never take the place of a son.
Oh, Molly, you know that's not what I want.
But can't you at least be proud of your daughter for following her heart and living a life she thought was worthwhile?
Who said I wasn't proud of you, Dovey?
And I know he's not rich,
None of that matters now, Molly.
or is part of a military family, or owns any land.
Now just wait a
But
minute.
have I really disgraced this family so badly by falling in love with a man who loves
You're
me?
not a disgrace. You're a LeBlanc.
I love Charlie to death, Daddy, and nothing will ever change that.
No, I'm not trying to change anything anymore.
There is nothing that will keep me from him. Nothing. Do you see that now, Daddy?
George can't think of anything to say to her except,
Yes, I can see that now, Dovey. And, I'm just so sorry. Charlie, he's a good man, and I'm happy to call him my son.
He pulls his daughter into his chest and presses her body against his, realizing he had single-handedly delivered her into the grips of evil. And for what? His own pride, anger, vanity. He was everything his political opponents said he was, maybe worse.
You know this bad temper of yours isn't good for your heart. I can hear it beating all bad from here. Just try and enjoy yourself, Daddy. And besides, like you said, you haven't lost me, right? You've gained a son.
Molly looked through the windows of the dimly lit bar in hopes she'd see her husband well and back to mingling.
Hey, Molly.
George said, redirecting his daughter's attention to him. It was time to let her go, starting now. He pushed her away and grabbed her by the shoulders as he said,
I could not be more proud of you as a daughter, as a woman. I've always been so proud of you. Take your husband's last name, do what you want, it's your life.
Molly melts. George unpockets his watch and examines it quickly. There were 16 minutes left until midnight.
Hurry, go enjoy your party, and don't worry about Charlie. He'll be right as rain. Soon enough.
Molly's face beamed and shone as bright as the moon in the sky above.
Thank you, Daddy. I love you so much.
She said, her voice wobbling through happy tears. It warmed his cold, overworked heart. She kissed his cheek and quickly ran back into the Royal Hotel bar to wait for Charlie. As for George, he carefully wandered the streets of the French Quarter, realizing there may be a devil waiting around any corner. Perhaps he was the only devil lurking tonight. He made it as far as the graveyard where he recently plotted his biggest mistake. Charlie's soul wasn't the only one taken that night. He admired how quiet and peaceful the twilight was, despite the many sins no doubt being committed throughout it. He stood at the cemetery gates for a while, looking through them and becoming nearly envious of the perfect rest the inhabitants were getting.
The boy's dead.
A voice broke into his contemplative silence. George swung his head around and found Bart standing behind him with his hands in his pockets.
For good this time.
He looked up at George, assuming he'd have an opinion about it. George only nodded in understanding.
But Mr. LeBlanc, you ought to head back now, right away.
Bart started fidgeting.
Why's that?
Bart looks down at his dirty boots as if he didn't hear him.
What is it? Molly? How is she faring?
I'm sorry, Mr. LeBlanc.
Bart says quickly. He sneaks quick, childlike peeks at George, letting his chin fall towards his chest.
What's all this about?
George asks, fully invested in Bart now.
Your daughter, she didn't take it well. We tried to hide him in a room upstairs till the police came, me and the brother, but she found him.
And what?
George pressures, bothered by Bart's trepidation.
She fell, sir. She fell from the balcony. It had to be an accident. It just had to be. But she's gone. Your wife needs you right away. I'm real sorry, pal.
With this, Bart swiftly scurries away from him, disappearing into the dense shadows of New Orleans. George stood braced against the gates of the cemetery under the bright, shining moon. He was alone and frozen in place. He felt his sense of hearing leave as the blood rushed into his head. His sense of sight wavers as the already dark world around him dims even more. He grabs at his chest as there suddenly doesn't seem to be enough air to breathe. He feels as if an invisible force grabbed his chest cavity and ripped at his heart. Finally, the weight of his tired body overwhelms him, and he slides down the flaking wrought iron bars of the fence. And then, in the soulless still of the night, the crickets erupt once again into their midnight chorus.